Hey everybody, Coach Kerr with the Scully Fight Team doing another episode of two FMA-Nerds talking about stuff. So in this episode, I got to talk to Guro Peter Mitchell. He's an FQI with the Taboada Balintawak system of Eskrima. I got to meet him and his wonderful wife, Cindy, at this year's West Coast camp. And yeah, in this episode, we got to talk about some great topics. One of which we got to talk about is this dynamic about being a Filipino martial arts instructor who's non-Filipino, and that's a tricky subject, but it's an important one to talk about. And honestly, it's one of the better topics that I got to discuss on this podcast. Also, we got to talk about annual events. So he's got a couple of events that he's hosting for seminars. And overall, just like the growth of what FMA can be and what he's doing to help make it grow and elevate. So, yeah, if you like this, like, subscribe, do all the things. But let's get into the episode and enjoy. It's a good one. Thanks, Ed. Guro Peter, how are you, sir?
Good afternoon. I'm very well. How are you?
Awesome. I'm doing well. We were had a little rough start there with me mumbling, but it happens. So as we get started, let's start with a story of who you are, where you come from the beginning, and then we'll work our way forward into your involvement with Balintawak and life in general. As you're doing that, I'm just going to share some stuff out.
Sure. But how from the beginning do you want this to be?
Well, let's start from where you're from.
Where am I from? I am at the moment. I'm in Toronto, Canada. I grew up in Collingwood, Wasaga Beach area. For those of you in the Canada area that know where that is, which is basically 2 hours north of Toronto. It's a little ski resort town called Collingwood. And then moved here when I was 19 or 20, and then I've never looked back. I've never really lived anywhere else. Short little sojourn to Coburg a couple of years ago during COVID. I had the opportunity to move out of the city during the shutdown, which was awesome because little towns just do it up better. They're way more chill than the city was about that whole process. So no, that was phenomenal. And then last summer, I guess it was 2021 or 2022 of the summer, we moved back into Toronto, and this is where I've been ever since.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So what is we'll dive back into it, but what has been the big culture shock and transition from where you were before to where you are now? Because moving from a larger community to a smaller town, there is a bit of a shift in community perspective.
Yeah. Actually, the shift was pretty positive. I grew up in a small town. So by small town, 15 to 17,000 when I was there. And so when we moved into Coburg more recently, it was like going back home into Collingwood. And so we found just the pace of living, plus we were literally a 5 to 8 minute walk away from the waterfront, that it felt like we were on vacation for a while.
Nice.
Which was all right. So like we were both working from home every day. We get to go walk down by the waterside, and especially if the weather was really nice. And the only downside is for some reason the coffee shops closed at 3:30 in the afternoon, which, you know, when you finish work at 3:30, 4 o'clock, you want to go grab a coffee or something, and that just wasn't possible. So that was the only downside of Coburg that we found anyway.
Okay, that's fair.
But from a culture shock point of view, we weren't shocked. We were pleasantly surprised.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's fun. So professionally, what sort of work do you do, and what's your background in education?
So I growing up, I've been a jack of all trades. I went to college for hotel restaurant management. Was working in restaurants for a number of years, and then got into finance and was doing stock option and mutual fund reconciliation for compliance departments in a couple of different institutions here in Toronto. And then that kind of imploded, and I went from that and worked in a warehouse for a number of years and became a supervisor there, working with heavy machinery. and then really did not like that, but it was paying the bills. And then got into personal training in 2011. And so I was a personal trainer from 2011, well, till currently. And in the middle of that, was also a master trainer or a pro trainer for CanFit Pro, which is our national certification body.
Okay.
So I train trainers to be trainers, and as well as do the personal training thing. And then moved away from that because it just wasn't my scene, and I was really getting into the martial arts thing at that stage of the game. And
so anyways, getting into the martial arts, what was your first foray into martial arts? Because it's a curious thing how people find their way to martial arts, especially finding their way to FMA, because for a lot of Filipinos, we just kind of discover like, oh, we have our own martial art. But for everybody else, it's curious as to how they get into it. And it's based on regionality in time period, because just like everybody else in North America in the 90s and 2000s, it was all about karate and taekwondo. So I'm curious, is that the same experience for you?
Partly, yes.
Okay.
My first foray into martial arts was Greco-Roman wrestling.
Gotcha.
So I started wrestling when I was 7, and I did that for 4 or 5 years, and tournaments all over Ontario. So from an experience point of view, did a lot of tournaments, really enjoyed the regional stuff, did not enjoy the provincial stuff.
Yeah.
And my final year, I made it all the way to provincial championships, and just did not enjoy myself at all. And not necessarily because of the wrestling part. It was for me, it was like all of us, a bunch of guys hanging out together and wrestling for the day. Let's go. And then by the time I got to Ontario, it was like a bunch of really serious people, and nobody wanted to talk to each other because this was for real now. And I'm 11 or 12 years old at the time. And my first match was 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning. And then my next match was at 1 o'clock. And then my last match was at 6 p.m. And it was just like 10 hours of waiting for that final match. And I was done. Didn't care. I could win, I could lose, didn't care, because the fun had been sucked right out of it. And all the pressure and all the reasons for me being there were gone. Loved the wrestling. It was so much fun. Great group of guys, great coaching, but just that sit around and wait. Yeah, it drove me bonkers. I'm not a sit around and wait kind of guy.
Yeah, that's a key factor, is the fun part, because it is the reasons why. And I ask this often of my guests, myself, and just in general when it comes to martial arts and just life in general, because our why changes throughout time, and that's okay. But especially when you're going into something and when you're finding enjoyment and fulfillment while you're doing it at 10 years old, what is your why? Are you going to become an Olympian and later on whatever professional background the wrestling comes in? Who knows? But if you generally get into something because you like it, you find it fun, you find it fascinating, the dreams thereafter for glory, professionalism, as becoming a professional athlete, that may be the dream of the child, but that might be also heavily influenced vicariously through the parents and the culture that they instill in their household. So it's interesting to see that juxtaposition. So it sounds like with you, it was fun, but when you got to that extra level, that really wasn't what you're after.
Yeah, it became pretty clear that wrestling for the sake of wrestling, I was all about. But the competition or needing to be the number one guy in the room, I just didn't have the mindset for it, or the self-discipline, to be perfectly honest. And some kids are born with it, some kids are taught about that, and that wasn't like, I come from a family where both of my parents were music majors. So what a lot of people don't know is that I'm a classically trained musician.
Oh, nice.
And did that for many years, and I regret not doing it anymore, but the discipline went towards music, towards artistic ventures, and not necessarily towards the martial kind. But moving forward, like you mentioned the karate and the taekwondo thing. Taekwondo, we had a club in Collingwood that moved in a few years after I quit the wrestling. And so I went into that, and I did that for a number of years as well. and did the tournament scene and the whole bit. And it was at that point that I became aware of sort of what the politics in martial arts was about.
Yep.
Which was really eye-opening. And my instructor, the master of the school, I don't want to drop his name, and just in case, because I have no idea where he's at, just in case he's still active. I don't want to cause any problems, but it's at the time, he was a 35-year-old 5th degree black belt in Korea in Taekwondo, and a former national champion from Korea, or university champion, something like this. So we would go to these tournaments, and he wouldn't treat the grandmasters in the room with respect, because in his mind, well, I can beat all of them. Why should I?
Yep.
So consequently, whenever our school went to one of these tournaments, none of us would get put into the either the weight level or the belt level that we were supposed to be in. So we do our weigh-ins, and I would have 155 pounds stamped on my hand, and then I'd get dropped into the heavyweights.
Yep.
So that was very interesting. Never placed lower than 4th, which is not bad, but heavyweight, like I came back with some really, really good bruises.
Yep. It's the repercussions and responsibility of leadership, because the way anybody is treated is contingent upon their tribe, and often the leader of said tribe. And it leads into like the wider issue about politics in martial arts. And since this is a Filipino martial arts podcast, FMA is renowned for our politics, and it is curious to see how different organizations and individuals are treated thusly, because the leadership and the people attached to that. And then you see what's really interesting is how people are well received and loved because of the leadership and the culture that they engender. Because the thing that I really have leaned onto and love about the Taboada Balintawak community is it's a family. And the culture and ethos that GM Bobby instills is that family dynamic. Be good ambassadors, be good people, and don't cause problems. And as a result of it, the resulting community and culture is so welcoming and inviting. And it's one of the things I really love being participant of, and having found this tribe, this home, so to speak.
Yeah, and we're not perfect, but we do our best.
Yeah.
Right. And I would almost chalk it up more to family bickering than politics.
Yep.
Right. And every family has it. And more often than not, we work it out and we work our way through, and everyone comes out the other end of it, hopefully better for it. Yeah, that's been my experience thus far. Yeah, positively.
So leading it, since I brought it up, and since you are a level 7 fully qualified instructor in Taboada Balintawak Eskrima, how did you get connected and start with GM Bobby?
So in 2013, my brother-in-law walked into a framing store to get swords framed for his grandmaster or his master, his modern Arnis master. And that happened. That was my brother-in-law's shop. So my instructor wandered in there, and instead of, and this is the way my brother-in-law thinks, it's like, it doesn't always have to be a cash transaction. Sometimes we can do things in trade. So instead of having cash exchange hands, it's like, well, why don't you teach us for a bit? So he for himself, myself, so Ray, Cindy, my wife, myself, and Ray's son Max, we started modern Arnis, then started training with him in 2014.
Okay.
And then part way along, the decision was made to switch over to Taboada Balintawak. So Terrence had made a trip. Terrence Dowd, by the way, Guru Terrence Dowd. He's out of Whitby, Ontario.
Gotcha.
He went down to meet with GM Bobby and train with him, and see sort of what it was going to be like in that community. Came back, was all excited, and we decided to make the transition over to Balintawak. So in February of 2016, we started. And then as of, I guess it was October or November of 2016, I had my COA at that stage of the game. So about 9 months later. Nice. I don't put that out there as then, whoa, look at me. Like, yes, we were spending 6 to 8 hours a week working Balintawak. Retrospectively, I wouldn't do it the same way again. It was too fast.
Yeah, I get it.
There were too many things that I missed in terms of what FMA is, what the system was doing, and I've since filled in those holes. But at the time, yeah, like I was going into this blind almost. Yes, I knew the curriculum, but it was just rote.
Yeah.
And with very little understanding of what was going on. I thought I knew.
Yeah.
I did not know.
Yeah, it sounds like you, and many people have fallen into this, is that you got into the curriculum, understood the requirement in the physical response, I hate to say rhetoric, but the things particular to that structured lesson plan,
Yep.
but hadn't had the time to marinate and understand the nuances and all the wider, bigger knowledge.
Yeah.
And this is what I find with a lot of things, and that comes just with experience, is because curriculums are as what they are. If you pay attention to them, you can adhere to them, and then you can execute. Sure, you can do the stuff, but do you understand it? Can you explain it or understand to the point of explaining it? And better yet, can you just ostensibly just know what it is? Because it's one thing to be able to repeat pattern, but to connect and then play off and then pick up on somebody else's energy, that's that knowing part.
Correct.
And that's the thing that I find with a lot of people with specific structured curriculums is they can follow and do kata by numbers, but can they do something with it? And it's actually the phase I'm in right now with Balintawak is, I can kind of muddle through the steps and structure of the curriculum, but the nuance is lost on me because, one, I don't get the lived in day out hands-on training with an FQI or COA because I'm doing things correspondently over the internet. And two, the biggest issue is I'm often finding that I override and get stuck in this like blending mentality and trying to stay in the lane of this is Balintawak, stay in Balintawak.
Yeah. So a couple of points there. Like, for me, the curriculum is it's a framework that you should be working your way through to build your skill base from. And more often than not, the meat and potatoes of the curriculum isn't necessarily everything that's there.
Yep.
I can't speak to other curriculums, to be perfectly honest. I can only speak to this one in FMA specifically. The two things that step out for me as I was learning what FMA was or is, and had one of those conversations with Terrence and I can't remember who else was in the room. Might have been Draf Demura is another FQI up here. And I say, well, do you guys have hitting? Because it's all sticks, right? It's like, oh no, we have that. Okay, what about joint lock? No, that's there. Okay, do you do kicking? Oh yeah, no, we do kicking. It's like, okay, what about wrestling? Oh yeah, we call that dumag. We do this. No, it's all there. It's all right. So I had to go through this process of disbelief, thinking that I had this understanding of what martial arts was, and what the landscape was, and realizing that I was so off base. And just this discovery process has been awesome because now I'm all in. It's like, why go do karate when I can do FMA? Why go do right? Like why go do all these other systems when it's all there in FMA? Not that these other systems don't have anything to offer me anymore, but it's more along the lines of if I didn't have to, if I don't have to, I don't have to.
Yep. And again, that it's interesting where the people find that intersection as to why they find a particular method, style, or flavor of a martial art or curriculum or structure is unique to themselves. Because we often run into this issue, and it's just humans across the board, is comparative valuation and this issue about identity contingent upon the perceived value by others, when the fact is our journey, our process, our to grow is to experience, and the summation of life, it's really about us, and it's up to us to determine what we want to do, the interactions that we want to have, to take in the information and the experiences that we want, and it's so we don't surrender our free will to others, because when we surrender our free will to others, we end up failing by that way. So choosing FMA, it's beautiful when people find to choose FMA, and specifically the different nuances and approaches to FMA.
Well, it's interesting. Now it's my turn for my mouth not to work. It's interesting that you talk about people having to surrender up their free will to a process, and I think that that's true of learning of anything.
Yep.
There's an element where you have to surrender. You have to surrender to your coach. You have to surrender to your teacher. You have to surrender to your professor, whatever you want to call them, your master. There seems to be two trains of thought right now that I'm seeing sort of floating around the interwebs, and that's the blind following of a master, or don't have a master at all and just cherry pick what you want.
Yep.
And I'm very much a middle ground kind of guy, where I'm all about exploration, but you have to have some foundation to explore from. You have to have a frame of reference.
Yep.
You need to complete something first before you can start looking around, in my opinion. And this is something that was taught to me by Coach Scott Sonnen, who was my PT coach. And he speaks about that both in terms of a fitness system, but also in terms of a fighting system, where these people go around and they try to create their own martial arts system. And unless you have an idea of what a martial arts system is supposed to look like, what are you creating? How are you creating it?
Yep. And because there's an issue about accreditation and crediting sources, because it seems that people want to consistently reinvent the wheel, especially with the age of the internet, especially with social media and brand association and the needs for marketing. Because the fact is that people do this for a living, they have to do the things necessary to be successful at that. And then I will never, as long as it doesn't violate ethos and legal process, I will never look down upon somebody who's trying to hustle, because the fact is I've been there and done that as well.
Everyone needs to build a rice bowl.
Indeed. So, but the problem we run into is like the ownership of knowledge, because who can really own knowledge, especially if it's human knowledge, particular to martial arts and fighting, because humans, to be very crass, figured out some things a very long time ago. We learned how to fuck, we learned how to fight, we learned how to feed ourselves. And the other two are contingent upon our ability to fight. So when people try to codify a doctrine of fighting and saying that I invented fighting, it's like, come on, did you really? And on top of all that, trying to attach marketing associated with it, this is where the issue that we find on the internet with people creating systems is like, are you codifying an approach and method of preferences, or did you truly invent something new, when the fact is there's really no true invention into human movement?
At this stage, any movement that could be moved has been moved. Indeed. Yeah. And it's a question of is what movements do you own in your own practice and in your own system? I would further that with these people who are creating their systems. More often than not, they're creating their systems. Usually, they're borrowing heavily from somebody else's, because they had an argument with them. So that's it. Okay, I'm taking my ball and I'm going somewhere else. And then they create their own system, pretty much copying, and then they'll pull from a variety of others to make it look different enough that it's not quite the same, but it is the same.
Yep, and they adjust by branding and marketing, which, like I said, it's pretty typical. The things that I find, it's method is what separates apart, when they acknowledge that this is part of a larger organization, a larger breadth of thought, such as Balintawak is part of the history of Filipino martial arts, but it's contingent upon the region of Cebu, and then it's also contingent upon those who continue to carry it. But what it's unique to it is the codification of method, pedagogy, and process. And that's where it's a system beyond invention of something completely new. Because what it is, the movement's always been there, but addressing it as a structure that can be repeatable, measurable, and expanded with, that's a system.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about systems, and I'm going to refer this back to Balintawak specifically, is especially in the age of information, and the two parts of that are age of information, the collection of the black belt, the almighty black belt that once you have, apparently you know everything, and then a lack of understanding of what's after the black belt.
Yep.
So what was the first part again?
Oh, so you have your you have your methodology, your pedagogy, and your process.
Right. So in the age of information, the process or the drills of Balintawak are pretty public now. Not necessarily the ideas behind them, but people know what Balintawak is just by looking at it.
Yep.
Or maybe that's just me. I don't know.
No, there's a specific dynamic flavor, especially with Taboada Balintawak. You know they're a student of GM Bobby just by the snap and the pull and that intensity.
Yep, absolutely. And the mistake that gets made, and this is what I'm trying to figure out how to work around with my students and in my school, is that there is life after level 6.
Yep.
It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be level 7 or instructor. But there is so much more to learn and to develop and build upon within the system after 6 that these people who are getting their 6 and going sayonara, this has been fantastic. That it's really about partly student retention, but partly I think the proliferation and the growth of Balintawak is in its exploration outside of level 6. Ironically, it's revisiting all of your basics, and then how do you break them apart and put them back together in I would say idiosyncratic ways, meaning that unique to the individual who's done the exploration.
Yep.
And that's from there. That's how we got Taboada Balintawak.
Yep. Movement and method as a result of preference, experience, capability, and sometimes limitation. I have this theory, or I have this thought. It's not uniquely mine, but I have this thought that the reason why styles exist is because, one, it was a technique or approach to fighting that was unique to the progenitor, and they were able to pull it off enough times that it was, again, repeatable, measurable, and teachable. And then they taught it to their students thereafter. And as a result of their students are trying to match the exact circumstance, the capability, technique, and process to the progenitor, but continuously fail to do it because people are different. And you cannot repeat combat enough, because combat is chaos, to match all the same scenarios in a perfect order.
Correct.
Now we have principles that we can operate as a rule set. We have concepts that connect, but we get often lost in the minutia of techniques because of personal preference, capability, limitation, experience, knowledge, etc.
You got it. Yeah. And the thing that I like about Taboada Balintawak is that it really is your own experience that you have to start developing them and growing from. So if you were to throw one at me, like a driven one in Balintawak, how I respond to it's going to be very different from, say, when you like Jeff Soriano you had on your show, right? So he responds to it. Yes, we have the same technical movements, but Jeff moves differently than I do. Right? Brian Sloyer moves differently than we do. GM Bobby moves differently than everybody else. And like I've never had any aspirations to be GM Bobby Taboada, because in order for him to become GM Bobby Taboada, man, he had to go through stuff. I don't want to go through that stuff.
There's only one GM Bobby. There's only one. There's only one Michael Jordan. There's only one Tim Kennedy. There's only one Peter Mitchell. There's only one me, the Mighty Brown Man. So
100%. So the question is then, from a legacy point of view, what are we going to be representing ultimately? Right. And so I have, it's when you get these blanket statements from people that say, it's this is what FMA is, or this is what Balintawak is. And if you don't do it this way, then you're not doing it right. Or if you're not sparring, then it's not FMA. If you're not pressure testing, it's not FMA. And on the one hand, I get it. Like, if you want to see whether or not your art works, then you got to put some pressure to it. You have to. Absolutely. Now, I would debate whether it needs to be sparring or pressure testing, and those could be one and the same, or they could be two different things.
Also, the nuance of what is sparring. That's a fun rabbit
Yes.
hole.
Yeah.
So here's a fun one that I ask actually consistently, mainly for my Filipino guests, but
Sure.
the Filipino martial arts has more proliferation and exposure due to the West than Filipinos back in the islands. Like, point in case for myself, I didn't discover what FMA was until I was at a Taekwondo Kyokudo school, even though I was doing FMA for the longest time. That's an interesting story, but I was doing FMA, but didn't realize it was FMA. But question back to it is I ask all my Filipino guests, what is FMA? Furthermore, what is a Filipino? As a Westerner, as a Caucasian, I'm curious, what is your definition of FMA? And thereby, what is a Filipino?
So I'm going to answer that with a bit of a story on that. It's I was watching an interview with Denzel Washington, and one of the questions that came up was, why do you need a black director for a movie about a black experience? Mm-hmm. Why do you need a Jewish director for something like Schindler's List? Mm-hmm. And technically you don't, but ultimately I would say that it's a cultural reference, and that, mm-hmm. or like, why is Scorsese so successful at doing Italian-based movies? Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? So ultimately, from a cultural point of view, I don't know that I'm qualified to speak to it as mm-hmm. a Filipino about the cultural impact of Balintawak as part of their culture. I can definitely appreciate it, mm-hmm. And its level of sophistication just blows my mind all the time as I'm doing stuff and I'm discovering stuff. It's like, man, they came up with this. This is just outstanding.
Yep.
And so the part B to that, though, is that I'm having people approaching me who are Filipino because mm-hmm. they want to experience part of Filipino culture. Mm-hmm. So consequently, more often than not, I'm the token white guy in the room.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Which I think is all sorts of awesome. I feel a little bit guilty that I'm the one showing Filipinos part of their culture, but it's a pretty awesome thing when you see these guys and these women as well getting jazzed over the fact that this came from this is part of my roots. Mm-hmm. So I think from that point of view, I can comment on it, but I don't know that I can comment on it as a non-Filipino per se.
And that's totally fair. So like the thing that I run into, because I am one of those Filipinos that is trying to reconnect my culture, my ancestry. Yeah. I'm trying to reconnect my culture and my ancestry because it was denied by me because I'm adopted. I was raised by Americans here in the West. I've often been separated from the Filipino community. And also, like, when I meet the proper Filipino community as like first generation straight from the islands, there's a huge disconnect because, one, I don't speak. I don't have accent. I didn't grow up in the Philippines, even though I moved from here. So I find myself in this interesting intersection of the Filipino American community. And that also has some contentious situations because you have what is typical of a certain age group of any indigenous or post-colonial children that have a certain mindset of decolonization because they're trying to attach to a thing, but they're angry about it. So they do things out of spite and build the reconnection, but they deny the process, the connection thereafter of what actually was and what is, and they can't figure out how to create a new culture and be satisfied with that. Then you got the other side who celebrate that this is a new culture, and I'm happy to have what it is to be Filipino or whatever it is to be who I am, retake, recapture, repatriate what it was, and celebrate all those beautiful things and create something beautiful in of itself and new. And it's really the difference between preservation of culture and living culture, thereby creating new culture. Because preservation of a culture is a snapshot of one point in time. Yeah. And just the same, like when people think, what is FMA? They think of whatever specific narrative or legend particular to that lineage. versus what is FMA in the Western sense. Is FMA is its own culture, and as what it does is it allows Filipinos to connect to what was, but create what's new and celebrate it with everybody. And that's one of the things that I find so beautiful about the FMA community, especially when it's taught by non-Filipinos, because it's not my fault that I wasn't taught FMA. It's not my fault that you were taught FMA before me.
Yeah.
So I have to accept and celebrate that. And honestly, I wish more people would of a certain age and demographic as well, and just get over the fact that, yeah, you don't know FMA because you were never taught it, just like you don't know your language because you were never taught it. But do something positive with it and just move on with life.
Yeah, and the interesting part of that the colonization or decolonization conversation is, I think it can be agreed upon that there were some things that were done that were not awesome, but we are where we are now. And if we're going to be changing things, what does that transition look like? And what is it that we're going to be agreeing upon that we're changing it to? And transition's a rough gig.
Yeah.
So, and especially when I think the UN, just a quick circle around, global warming. We're just going to go into that for a sec, and I'm not going to get into that. So there were 120 items that were listed as things that could help with global warming, and like of the 120 of them, they have a committee and they can't agree on one of them. So it's sat there for like 10 plus years, nothing going on because nobody can agree on what they're supposed to switch to. So just turning that back around to like going from decolonization is, well, you could probably come up with a laundry list of things that you could do, but nobody's going to agree strongly enough on a direction that it's ever going to happen, which is unfortunate because there are probably some really cool things that could be invented and could be well, if not invented, then time could be turned back on some things. I don't know how that would work in a global economy, but it would be interesting to watch. Hopefully enriching for the people that were doing it.
Yep. And in the case of FMA, what it can be is, sure, we could intellectually roll back the clock of how far back do we want to go and deal with colonization. Because for one, the Philippines has been conquered and colonized many times over.
Yeah.
And on top of all that, the codification of the Philippines is based upon a modern nation state that's less than 100 years old. We're made of sub-tribes that shouldn't have really gotten along anyways because they were individual kingdoms. I liken the Philippines like American native indigenous peoples, where they were their own individual nations. But because the creation of America and the North American countries, they're codified underneath one specific ethnosphere, but they're not the same people. So when people look at this like branding of what is FMA, what is a Filipino, it's the issue of like, well, it's kind of a lot of stuff. It can be kind of whatever you want it, but it's complicated. Is basically what it is.
And if we were going to decolonize our FMA, because the FMA that was there before Magellan landed and tried to take over the Philippines,
spears, shields, and feathers,
and spears, shields, feathers, and bronze blades, right? So, and the irony of that is that a lot of FMA systems now have a lot of Spanish fencing influences. A lot of FMA systems have Western boxing influences and have Japanese martial arts and stuff because of the Japanese occupation. Chinese martial arts and Malaysian, like it was all this mixing pot. So how are you going to pull and separate all these martial arts and all these systems and processes that were put in place because of the influence of these other cultures that got dropped onto your lap?
I mean, looking at our own GM, I mean, he's a black belt in Shotokan, and he's a former boxer. And he grew up in the Philippines, and he fought. So, is it FMA? Absolutely. What makes it FMA? Stuff. So,
the technical term, stuff.
Yeah. stuff. His experiences and what he does with it is what I find is the definition that it's FMA. And it's also what I'm leaning toward in the definition of what is a Filipino. It's a Filipino because a Filipino says it's Filipino, or it is agreed upon that it's a Filipino. Because I run into this thing as I am a father to a daughter and never been a father to a daughter before. And this issue of what is manly, because there's that whole, that loaded situation in general is what are gender roles, what is manly, what is unmanly. The thing that I have come to celebrate, agree, and just acknowledge is whatever I do is manly, and whatever I do with my daughter is manly, whether it is having a tea party, getting my nails painted, doing whatever, it's manly because I'm doing it and I enjoy it and I appreciate it, regardless of like the preconceived notions of culture and expectations. It's just because I'm doing it, it is what it is.
I would suggest that it's also manly because you're fulfilling your role as a father.
Yep.
And that's part of what it is to be a man.
Yep.
So yeah.
And so when it comes to FMA and what is a Filipino, it's because, well, it is. You don't have to have this codified, and this is the issue about the question, and I propose this often in my video work is it FMA? Well, the answer is yes, but people will debate whether or not it is. And that's actually the gag behind it is, what is the definition of FMA? Is it the curriculum? Is it the culture? Is it the person doing it? Because the big issue that a lot of just a certain age and demographic will look at FMA is you have all these Westerners teaching FMA. You have all these Westerners that are grandmasters. It's like, well, it's not their fault. So, which leads into a bigger question for me is, have you had some resistance in the past? And if so, how have you overcome that cultural resistance?
I have.
Okay.
I
know it's a tricky subject to navigate, and we can be
it's because I don't think that it was an intentional. Well, it was. I'm going to leave that one alone because it really, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but really, I have had people that don't want to learn from me because I'm white.
Yeah.
And it's simple as that.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, it's like, yeah, but whether I'm white or not, I can still teach you the same thing.
Yeah.
But if people are interested in the authenticity of it, or to say, well, if you're Filipino and you want to learn from another Filipino, because then all of your lineage is Filipino based, I can understand it from that point of view too.
Yeah.
Right. Because here you are potentially as a master or a future master or whatever, and you want to trace your lineages all the way back through purely to the islands, then having this white guy plopped in the middle of that, I can understand would be a bit of a spot on the record.
Yeah, but it's such a limiting perspective and mindset that speaks to, for one, the narrow-minded viewpoint of that individual who is denying the opportunity of one, a great human connection. Because let's face it, that martial arts teaching, the mentor teacher student dynamic, is can be a beautiful relationship, friendship, family-like structure. So that individual is missing on that great potential, and consequently, they're losing out on the opportunity of the knowledge and experience from said individual. So it's a sad state of affairs when people just deny an opportunity, self-selecting an opportunity because of prejudice and a preconceived notion. But they may get around to it, but they may not, and that is what it is.
Yeah, and I'm okay either way.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned in personal training, ironically, not in Filipino martial arts stuff, is that we can't be all things to all people. There was a certain type of clientele that gravitated towards me.
Yeah.
And the same way as a Filipino martial artist, And as an instructor, there's a certain type of clientele that's gravitating towards my school. And on the upside of that is they are a great group of people, and I'm super proud of them. And like even as new people are popping in, they get a feel for the vibe and they like it, and then everyone just kind of slides in, and everyone's very welcoming, and yeah, it's humbling.
Yeah,
it really is. So to that end, if someone doesn't want to train with me for whatever reason, I'm okay with that, because obviously I don't fit with what works for them. So go find someone else, go find something else, and I mean that in the best way. There's no reason why everyone can't be served. Like in the GTA, Greater Toronto Area, there's 7 million people. 1% of the population does martial arts or something like that. So whatever that is, if there aren't enough like instructors around in the GTA for you to find something, then maybe you're looking for the wrong thing.
Which is interesting, because circling back to this issue about regionality and opportunity, pre-internet, because the internet, you have such an opportunity to shop around, connect, and build a community that way, and you don't have to deal with the in thought. You don't have to deal with the suffering through the bad experiences of a bad instructor, bad and toxic culture of a training group, because that's all that was available. Because I've been part of some great martial arts training groups, and then I've been part of some not so great martial arts training groups, and it was due to, just like everybody else, what was available at that time, what my parents were willing to pay for at that time. And it's left training scars. But the difference now is people have such a bigger opportunity, provided they take the opportunity to go look.
Yeah, like I know guys in Canada that have instructors from all over the world. Like what other time in history could you be studying under a master down in the States, or a master in the Philippines, or a master in some other part of the world, from the comfort of your own home? That's pretty amazing. But that also speaks to it, like, well, okay, so I'm not your cup of tea, then go on the internet and find someone who is. Party on. Now, there's a lot to be said for that tactile, like the personal interaction, like like in Balintawak, you can only learn so far online. But it's doable. Yeah,
because like the thing that I've ran into is, because I'm doing things correspondently and showing up to events where I can, is one, I'm having to figure it out on my own, and two, I'm having to figure it out and problem solve it with my training partner. So by way of teaching him, so I run this issue that I am teaching things that aren't correct because I'm trying to figure it out, and there's that education experience deficit. And doing by correspondence is such a slow process, and so like I miss so much, and therefore what I find is going to be a longer process to achieve a COA if I am to. That's my goal. But it is a longer process because, one, I don't have the opportunity to actually be hands-on with my instructor. I don't have the opportunity to be hands-on with Belton every day of the week. I only get him like twice a year. So, but the beauty of that, however, is because of the internet, I was able to link up with him in the first place and the rest of the community in general.
And to my point, and that's exactly it, right? And this is really a phenomenal age to be alive in. And what in the circles that I'm running in from an FMA point of view, been a discovery of some really rare systems that need some light shone on them, or at the very least need to make sure that they continue to propagate, because a lot of these things are going to go extinct unless somebody picks it up and runs with it. So
what are those systems?
I think the ones that are actually taking off and doing well now, like if you look at the Campo 1, 2, 3, great little system. And it's taking off, and people have adopted it, and their instructors now in other parts of the world. But without the internet, that never would have happened. Right. Look at the Herosa de Cuerdas would be another one. Right now, the North American representative would be Master Paul Rosales. Right. So and he's doing his damnedest to try and grow and spread that here in America and in Europe and all over the place to make sure that, again, this phenomenal art doesn't die.
Yep.
We are quite fortunate with Balintawak that now, with GM Bobby's work that he's done, and done a phenomenal job of sharing Balintawak with the world and growing our awareness for it. And also because of that, not only is there Taboada Balintawak, but all of the other Balintawak systems are now on the world scene because people want to know what else is out there.
Yep.
Right. So the chance of that going extinct is pretty low. Yeah. Right. And so to me, it's not that these other systems are the be all to end all. It's more that they are part of the Filipino culture. They are part of the landscape and should be preserved as such, and evolved as such as well. Anyway, that's just now is the time really when that's possible.
I totally agree. It is a beautiful opportunity of what it is to be alive today. Because you and I were musing before we went live about we grew up pre-internet. Yep. So there was a certain cultural process that we had to adhere to, and then we're figuring things out moving forward of like we can turn it off when we need to because we just can, but there is an issue of like those thereafter can't just turn off their phone because they're so connected to it. So they have access to all this material and this information, but whatever they do with it versus just like the passive observer and actually putting it into practice and doing something, that's the hurdle. Because they have such access, but are they actually doing something?
I would suggest that the biggest hurdle for people today, especially the people growing up in today's society, would be how do you select proper filters, and how do you filter the information coming to you so that you head in the direction that you want to, and you don't start chasing squirrels, for lack of a better metaphor.
No, that's a great metaphor, because Paulo and I have had this conversation often, and we had a podcast about it the other day about the presentation of logical information, and on top of all that, trying to critically, as the viewer, trying to critically analyze and look at it as like, is this actually something that I should be watching, or am I just wasting my time? And that's a fun rabbit hole.
Or is what I'm seeing actually valid, or is it just a snapshot? Or like, and you'll see the trolls, and that's usually the best way to figure out, whether or not somebody has something there potentially, or that it's nothing, or that it's just a snapshot in time. That if you pull the lens back, that a full picture, then that makes way more sense. You're giving away the whole system if you pull the lens back. So that goes back to the idea of filters. Like how do we filter out the BS from the reality?
Yep.
Right. Because there are guys that look good on film. Like not to throw Krav Maga under the bus, but there were a couple of few Krav Maga guys who put on really, really good shows.
Yep. Like
Didis, look, it looks badass, but it's Krav Maga, and you don't do that in the actual self-defense that Krav Maga gets taught. Like that's just for show.
Yep.
At which point, I guess it's no longer Krav Maga because it's just for show.
Yep.
So that's where you, again, filter. What's the hype? What's the reality?
And that leads into the question about Balintawak, because a lot of people ask, and we were talking about this beforehand, about Balintawak sparring. As a level 7, could you explain why Balintawak doesn't spar?
Okay, so I've actually been thinking about this quite a bit because I do believe ultimately that if you're going to use this as a self-defense system, you need to pressure test it.
Absolutely.
The whole process of 1 through 6 prepares you for that. And you could put a lot of pressure on inside those drills.
Yeah, speed alone.
Absolutely, just the
intensity of speed.
Yeah. So if we go back pre GM Bobby, my understanding of the reason why Balintawak came to be, other than the fact that Balintawak's just the name of the street that the school was on, was that the originator, and Xiong was part of Doce Perez. And his concern was that, or this is my understanding, was that FMA was being watered down and becoming more sport-like and less combative. So he removed himself from Doce Perez and started up this other, so that he could reintroduce the combative nature of FMA. And that's what his self-defense system was. I think you even call it a self-defense system. When GM Bobby came onto the scene, he was always taught that he wasn't supposed to spar until he learned the whole system, and that when he got caught sparring, he would get his licks.
Yeah.
Right. His grandmaster would not be happy with him and would let him know in no uncertain terms with a stick. Right. So GM Bobby's now saying, if you're sparring with it, it's not Balintawak. Yeah. If you want to learn how to fight, go get into a fight and use Balintawak.
Yeah.
Now, in North America, that's not really possible. Not really. Not if you want to still be breathing free air.
Yeah.
Right. But it speaks to the idea that sparring with it is discouraged, one. And you could say, well, then why are you listening to your master? We'll respect. We'll start with that. But the second thing is experience. The dude's been fighting with this for he fought with this for decades.
Yeah.
And the other thing he says is that a fight in Balintawak is 3 to 5 seconds. Now spar that.
Yeah.
Right. So anything longer than 3 to 5 seconds, and not that it's no longer Balintawak, but it's moving outside the realm of what you should be aiming for as a fight in Balintawak. So I would suggest then going to the pressure testing component. It's figuring out how to pressure test or scenario test an opening of a fight, and you have 3 to 5 seconds to go through it, and then coming through the stages that you have to move through in order to develop that process. And so I'm in the middle of talking to guys and figuring that shit out.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what's going to come of that just yet. I don't know if I'm going to find the answers, but I'm going to give it the old college try. The
process is what actually makes it interesting.
Yeah.
It makes it unique.
Oh, I'm having a great time with it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I will never step away from GM Bobby's teachings in the sense that I'm not going to spar this in like a 3-minute round thing where helmet put on gloves type of way. Balintawak specifically, I still think sparring is a lot of fun. I still think there's a lot of value there, but not for Balintawak specifically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because one, it's a matter of what is the ethos, what is the intentionality, and what is the purpose of a methodology. Because you have Balintawak, as I understand it and have come to understand it from a curriculum standpoint, is it's teaching you specific patterns of effective movement. Now, a question, furthermore, good technique is effective economy of movement.
Yeah.
So Balintawak is teaching you effective techniques, but it contextualizes it in a different format. It doesn't contextualize it for this is sparring for competition. It contextualizes this is for a fight, for violence, as one hit. And this is actually it plays into the influence of Shotokan karate on both GM Bobby and just the martial arts in general. A lot of the theory behind a lot of Shotokan karate's approach is you're one and done. All you have is one incident, the 3 seconds of one single punch, and you're done. Because that's, if you're going beyond that, you cause more opportunity for failure and loss and danger. So execute immediately and move on. With Balintawak, it's quite evident that, if you get caught, especially with a sweeping back, as GM Bobby often will force everybody to sweep back, that one back cut, you're done. Or just that simple driving punch, you're done, given the placement and opportunity. So,
correct. So when you're defense encounter there, though, Kurt, every time you do a defense encounter, you're finishing a fight. Yep. Right? There's that defend, quick return, defend, quick return, defend, quick return. And then it's just a series of fight enders. Yep. And if you look at it that way, and if you look at your drilling that way, it changes the dynamic of how you're approaching it. It changes the dynamic of your body position even. Yep.
Yep, because the we do different things when it's a sustained round, because when you're fighting for 3 to 5 minutes, you have a different intentionality and conservation of your movement, your energy, and long-term strategy. As you're putting, if you're doing fight enders, you don't have the impetus of like writing it out to score, writing it out to match the end of the round. But on the other part about it, when you do spar, because there's a great comment here from Mark Medieros on the Instagram feed, is that he does love sparring with Balintawak. It allows him to punch in boxing range as well as having a stick, which leads into this bigger discussion about stick boxing. And that's one of the things that I love exploring with Balintawak as the platform, is this idea of stick boxing. And there's some great videos out there of like of Guro Belton and Guro Alex, them exploring just that.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant. And sparring with it in the idea of trying to get your left hand involved. But now, what's the point of your sparring at that point? Is it to work towards that 3 to 5 second round ender or 3 to 5 second fight ender, or are you looking for your angles and ways of getting your left hand involved?
Yeah,
right. Are you looking for ways of how to put your combinations in play, or entries or exits? Like I don't know, whatever the reason is you're doing sparring that round. I don't believe in sparring necessarily for the sake of doing it. There needs to be a purpose behind the reason I'm in this session of sparring today, because I'm working on this and this.
That was leading to what I was thinking. This has actually been the consensus that I've had with everybody on this podcast talking about sparring, not just FMA, but combat sports, is what are you actually working on? We're chasing goals and outcomes within a rubric of testing a concept rather than just trying to score points. Because when you're scoring points, the goal is to win the round, to win the fight. But when you're sparring in the gym and in the development process, as goal-oriented, specific to a concept and principle that you're developing and processing. So utilizing Balintawak as a platform for sparring, for stick boxing, if your process is, I want to get the fight ender, I want to get my left hand involved, that's specific, limited, and focused.
Yeah.
Now, am I going to do that over a sustained period? It's a different thing at that point.
The irony is that getting your left hand involved is already heavily implemented in the system. And a lot of the things that we do with our left hand, like our pushes and pulls, or that, like, it sets that hand up really up.
Yep.
So one could argue that even inside the drilling system, that just the random 12 with groupings, figuring out where your punches and where your strikes go in, whether they be hammer, uppercut, hook, jab, cross, whatever, where they fit in. It gets wheels turning. Yeah.
And again, that's the difference between, am I winning the round, winning the competition as an experience of I'm fighting the guy to defeat the guy, versus I'm trying to figure out how does this technique apply within this setting. Because I use a boxing drill, particular for my athletes, or I've used it in the past, is what I call the unreliable targeting drill, where the pad is only going to be up for however long I desire to have it up. And also it will be in an inopportune position for my athlete. So it forces them to change their position, makes them make a decision as to whether to engage or not.
Yep.
And also is that it's not going to be up there. So they either have to be quick enough or patient enough to set it up or to execute it. So in the case of Balintawak, especially when people are doing the gauntlet, because it's my favorite thing to watch at testing, is the gauntlet, is you get to see all the different flavors of the FQIs running the gambit with an up and comer, is that they have to apply what they're trained and adapt to, and it's literally sparring in a lot of ways. The goal in the end of it, in one perspective, it's sparring because they're having to win the round by not dropping their stick.
Yeah, there's an outcome. There's a specific outcome that they're working towards, and it is pressure testing.
Yep.
Yeah. The failure of stick the stick in the hand. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, that's a great comment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked heavily on the subject. Let's go back a little bit.
Okay.
So you linked up with GM Bobby after
Oh,
deciding to
word.
move from Modern Arnis. So
yeah, that was the decision that Terrence Dowd made for us, and he actually was very good about it. He had a conversation with all of us and consulted with all of us because we were students at the time, and said, "Hey, what do you guys think? This is what I want to do. Are you open to doing this?" And we're like, "Oh yeah, sure." I had no idea what Balintawak was in reference to Modern Arnis, other than it was there is Balintawak influence in Modern Arnis. That's about as much as I knew about it at the time.
Yeah. So what was that? So what was that process for you in that transition from one to the other, and better yet, your individual process and journey of following GM Bobby? Because as a lot of practitioners of training underneath GM Bobby is, we're constantly chasing him around the globe.
It's a bit like Where's Waldo. I joke about it a bit like like there are deadheads, people who follow the Grateful Dead around North America at all their venues, and I kind of felt like that for 2 years, chasing GM Bobby all over the cities of North America so I could train at these things.
Yep.
Heading into my level 6, it would be fair to say that intimidated was true.
Yep.
Right, because you're meeting someone who has a level of control, and not only in the martial art, but in your destiny as well within the martial art. Like, he says yes or no as to whether or not you pass.
Yeah.
There was that element to it. There was an element of like I had never seen a system from beginning to end before. So getting to see like a complete system in its entirety in and of itself was very rewarding. And also a bit of a letdown, not because it was a bad system, but because I'm thinking, is that it? And then they say, oh no, that's not it. Like, you've just touched the surface now. Now you're just beginning. And it's like, oh really? And then now, like let's see, 2016 is 2024 now. Like 8 years later, it's like, oh yeah, no, there's so much more. But in terms of my interaction with GM Bobby, Dog Brothers, that's not Balintawak. No, it's kidding.
But anyways,
yeah. GM Bobby will be in Toronto in June as well, if you're interested in that too. So, sorry, I got off track.
So we were talking about just scratching the surface with Balintawak, and now 8 years later, finding that it's so much more.
Yeah, the mechanics apply. Like, I see how the mechanics apply to so many different other martial arts. And I have a variety of martial artists that come through my school and bring a variety of martial arts experience into the gene pool of my school, and the movements that they own. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that a lot of people, regardless of their martial art, don't understand footwork, one, and don't necessarily understand the connection of footwork to mechanics.
Nope.
And so you'll see a disconnect between hips and shoulders, and the core is just a wet noodle in between, rather than something that's engaged, so you can follow through and use properly. That their feet are, as much as we have 2 feet, they use them as one unit rather than individual. Like, this foot independence is super important. One, for position, but also just in terms of force generation. And you can use 2 feet to generate torque. You can also use just one or none, depending upon what it is you want to do. So that's been interesting to go through. And you'll watch GM Bobby move, and you'll watch how he moves his feet around. And there are times where his feet are very quiet, but you can see from a midsection point of view. Don't worry, GM, not that I'm staring at your midsection. That he's generating force, and it's just become such old hat for him, and so easy for him that he's just in the right place when he needs to be there. It's just, you do it so often that you're there. So in my followings of him, and in the conversations with him, I think those were my big takeaways. Is one, the reason why we don't spar is that because the fight is so short, one, and then that our drilling system should be able to fill a lot of those holes in. The second part is the importance of mechanics, the importance of body position. The third thing is definitely the importance of community. In fact, I would almost flip those around and say the first thing is the importance of community.
That's the thing that I love the most, actually.
It really is. And I originally started Stickfighting Toronto to build a cadre of training partners, and it's turned into I'm building a community of people who like hanging out with each other.
Yep.
Which has been really awesome.
Bonding through violence. It's often what I call
it. Right? Yeah. Balintawak versus Balintawan, right?
Well, what's interesting, so one of the criticisms that I've often heard, and I've actually made ignorantly in the past before understanding, is that one of the things with Balintawak is that if you break the pattern, people get lost and can't follow along with it, which, sure, from a beginning standpoint, if you got two very young students who are young in the system who don't know the nuances of how to get back to the pattern, sure, that's a fair statement. But when you look at seasoned practitioners, veterans of the Balintawak community, that's what they do with the gauntlet. I mean, the point of the gauntlet is to throw chaotic, odd angles and different features, different energies, and it's requiring of the person who's going through the gauntlet to figure it out on the fly during the fight, so to speak. And so when people don't have the critical eye to actually see that, it speaks to them. Now, on the other side that continues that argument is this issue about when you break the pattern and deal with the chaos of a fight, of all the random, what does Balintawak do against a kick? What does Balintawak do against a shoot in? What does Balintawak do against an elbow? All those like what ifs, but the question runs into it is what is the responses to those what ifs? But what I'm observing, and I could be wrong, but this is an outsider new to the community, is that Balintawak does have answers to them. It's based upon the exploration of the COA afterwards, because they have taken the rubric, mastered the rubric, and then they made it their own.
100%. And so, and one of the things that I talk about with my students is that there are 4 roles that we run through in Balintawak. And when we're first starting, and this is basically level 1 through level 4, you're a receiver, right? And then at some stage of the game, you switch that role, you become a feeder. And then you get your level 6, at which point you become an instructor. And then if you decide to get your FQI, then you become a leader as well. Now, at some stage, you need to figure out, especially when you get into the level 6 and the FQI point of view, you really, speaking to you need to start taking the engine apart so you can put it back together in a way that kind of, like, I call it Lego, or seeing shapes and moving the parts around. And just like in boxing, where we have our focus mitts that we hold for our partner, when we're feeding, you can't help but start to see the holes. Like, not just in your own game, but in somebody else's game too, because you create holes for them to capitalize on. And then as they're capitalizing on said holes, you create holes for you to capitalize on as well.
It's the unreliable pad drill, basically.
Essentially, yeah. And the part B to that is, and this is where, going back to your comment where they're not able to break out of the pattern, it's believing that the only thing you can do is Balintawak-like. And it's like, well, no. I can use my elbows, I can use my knees, I can use my shoulder, I can put a headbutt in there if I absolutely have to. I don't like it, but I can use any other part of my body, and it's a question of proximity. And same for the person. So you figure out ways of where can I insert a kick here? And the quickest and easiest one is just doing a foot sweep, or an oblique kick, or a front kick, or Michael Melanier on one of his favorite is sticking a knee right up the middle in that 50-50 part of the oh man. He sunk that right into one of my COAs, and man, he almost dropped him.
Or just the foot traps. That's my.
Yeah.
I love watching the foot traps.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that quite a bit with nickel stick.
Mm-hmm.
We don't tend to do that as much in Taboada, although it is there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not something that we teach during the 1 through 6 curriculum so much.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's true for all schools. I know that we don't tend to in Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like if you see a hole, you can fill it with something. It doesn't have to be a stick.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I propose these outside thoughts. One, I'm speaking for the layman observing into it, because one, I'm not an authority in Balintawak, so I can speak from that ignorant, naive standpoint. But I also speak on the behalf of those.
I'm an FQI. I'm not necessarily an authority.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's see what else we got here. So Renee says to reach out to him because he's in Toronto. He's a full dog brother. He's known as Growling Dog.
Mm.
So yeah, he's good fun. So you had alluded to switching gears a little bit. So Balintawak, I'm there. I mean, I love Balintawak for what it is as a martial art. I love it for what it is as a curriculum. But what I love most about it is, again, it's the community, which leads back to something we were kind of dancing around with earlier about the community that you build. So what sort of community have you found is your tribe with your local group?
A day in a class with Peter, I think would kind of set it off. Where I love to joke around. I don't take my interaction with people super seriously, in the sense that I'm not there to okay, everyone bow. All right, now we're doing our exercise. Like I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
But when we drill, we're drilling. Yeah. When I ask you to do something, do it. And then when it's done, let's break it apart. We can talk about it. We can laugh about it. We can figure out what went well, what went wrong. But we're dealing with a subject which can be high stress for a lot of people, because we're dealing with violence. I don't know what people's backgrounds are. And people are there as an activity outside of work, which for a lot of people is stressful. So I try to make it as less stressful or as not stressful as possible and as fun as possible. But the martial art part I take very, very seriously. Yeah. So that's my balance. So consequently, once people have figured that out about me, it becomes very lighthearted in the class. Yeah. It's very relaxed, very casual. And consequently, people want to hang out after class, and then we'll go grab a drink, or we'll go grab a brunch, or we'll go grab a coffee, or whatever. People will sneak into a class early so they can sit and watch, and we'll sit and we'll chat as class is going on. So it's become very much like a neighborhood, like a neighborhood home where people come in and train, as opposed to this is your time right now. Where are you? It's like, it's like it's and I prefer that. Yeah. And the way I run my classes in my schools is basically like I did as a personal trainer, where I have I'm basically open 6 days a week. I take 1 day off. At the moment, I have about 30 hours of classes on the run. Yeah. Which is pretty awesome. And because of that, it gives lots of latitude for people to come and go when their schedule permits. Just like you would in someone's home, just like you would going to I'm free right now. Can I come over and play? It's like, all right, come on over, and then that's sort of how I run it. And then it's just a flat rate rather than paying the session rate, because me in accounting. Yeah. Yeah. So which leads, consequently, it's made it very relaxed and community and family based. Okay. So people are gravitating towards that. Which leads in another question: Is the instruction of martial arts your full-time job? Yes. All right. I have 5 personal training clients that I do online. Honestly, they're mostly family. And so that's my way of staying connected to some of my family and friends that way. But yeah, I'm a full-time martial arts instructor. From what I understand, I'm the I'm open to being corrected on this, but I think I'm the only full-time Taboada Balintawak instructor in North America. And I was talking to Chris Chu and his father Bruce, and they were doing the math and trying to figure out how many full-time FMA schools are out there. And I believe there's only 5 in North America.
Yeah.
So I'm in rare ground, and I'm super fortunate. I didn't plan it this way. It was COVID. I needed work. I needed to do something, so I went online and started teaching, and people enjoyed what I was doing, and then it became live, and we started doing this in the basement of my condo. And so we were, much to the chagrin of some of my neighbors, we were whacking sticks downstairs in the parking garage for about a year and a bit. They kept on threatening to, but they never did. It's like, oh, I should try that. I said, yeah, come on in. And they never did. And now I'm in a new place called the Monkey Vault, which is about 15 minutes north of me.
Nice.
And it's been phenomenal. But could I plan it this way? No. It's just kind of unraveled, and I've capitalized, and I've taken advantage of the opportunity, and super, super grateful. Like, it's,
congratulations.
Couldn't have asked for a better outcome. Yeah. It's hard work, but it's totally worth it.
Well, I mean, it's the benefit of having it's Backyard Group has such a loaded thought process, but it's a different thing from having a small training group that operates ad hoc depending upon the space versus jumping into subletting underneath somebody, and then you do the full plunge of owning and running a facility full time. People who do that successfully, my hat's off to them. Having been one of those guys that failed at it, that's a rough life. What I find is the happy medium. So in my process of done the gambit is I started off in the backyard, and I'm now back in the backyard with my son and my small group that's been with me for a long time.
Nice. Yeah.
The spot that I like a lot, though, as if I am to go back to teaching again, as I like subletting, because it gives me, one, I don't have the responsibility of the facility and ownership and overhead, and it gives me the freedom of movement to do that. Because just like any other working for somebody, I can just say clock out, I'm done. But those who have to do it full time, that's their primary bread and butter, but all their eggs in that basket, that's a labor of love that I wish the best of luck for anybody who does that, and my utmost respect for them who continue to do that, because that is being a full-time martial artist is a rough existence.
Yeah, it can be. And I've taken the road of sublet, where this is a parkour gym that the Toronto stunt community works out of. So I've access to people that are into movement anyway. I have access to the stunt community. I have access to some great facilities, and I'm also very close to transit, so it's easy for people to get to. There's tons of parking, and I didn't have to set it up. Yeah. Right. So like win-win-win.
Yeah. Just pay the dues, pay the rent, and you're good to go. That's a happy place to be.
Yeah, and again, I didn't plan it that way. Everything just sort of started falling into place and coming together. And okay,
yeah, that's awesome.
There's still a pinch me element to that. Is this really happening? Yeah,
that's awesome. So, like, here's a question for a lot of martial artists coming in who wants to use martial arts as their primary income. If they do so, best of luck. But there's martial arts that definitely make money. And then there's the obscure martial arts that are so niche that they have a hard time making money.
Yeah.
And so the question going into it is using Balintawak as a platform for your primary source of income. The question arises, and this is just the bigger issue that I find with FMA people, is what is the big end-all goal of being an FMA practitioner? Because I liken it, going back to the sparring conversation, is I liken it to what is the end-all goal for combat sports? One, or two, you can be an Olympic athlete for boxing, or you can turn into a professional athlete for boxing. And it's the same with mixed martial arts, Muay Thai, etc. The standard combat sports. So that's the end all goal of a lot of athletes coming into those skill sets, those lineages. So when it comes to FMA in general, what is the end all goal of a person going into FMA? Often I find is, of course, culture, just something to do. But majority of the time that I find is it's law enforcement, military, and personal private security that often utilize FMA as a platform for their purpose behind training. But for everybody else, the 80%, the question being is, what's the end state of an FMA practitioner? And by that way, what's the end state of a student coming into Balintawak as a martial art? What is the end all goal for that you can express and apply for them?
That's a great question, and some of what's there is an intangible. So I would love to say to you, well, they just go there, they get their 15th degree in Balintawak. It's like, no, it's not. Like, Balintawak ends at 7, right? So then what happens after that? And I think a lot of people get caught up in, well, I got my 6, now where do I go? Or I've got my 7, now where do I go? Well, you start a school. Well, I don't want to start a school. So a lot of people get caught up in that. I would suggest that, and I can only speak from my own experience and what I'm trying to do with my school is again going to my number one, which is create that community. Make sure that people have an end goal in sight. Ultimately, we are a Taboada Balintawak school. We do other FMA training, but only to inform our Balintawak, meaning that if you see this in Modern East, this is how it integrates into Balintawak, or this is how it could integrate into Balintawak. And I do that so that if people need experience getting ready for the 7, or are wondering, well, I've done my 6, now where do I go? It's like, well, here are these other components. Like, well, if someone comes at you like this with this from Modern East, how would you manage that? If someone comes at you like this, or with a knife or whatever, okay, well, how would we deal with a knife? And so we start to explore other areas. Can you do Balintawak with 2 sticks? It's a great thought experiment. It's not necessarily part of the system, but it gives lots of thought process and exploration that's available. And so I tend to do that with my students. Having said that, I have 2 6s so far, and I have some in the wings that are getting ready to head towards their 6 hopefully this year. Nice. And so as more students get higher up in the hierarchy of the system, what is that going to look like for Stick Fighting Toronto? I don't know. I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants for that. Yeah. In terms of what my mission is as a Balintawak practitioner, especially as an FQI, a representative of GM Bobby Taboada, my goal is to continue to grow Stick Fighting Toronto, but it's also to grow Taboada Balintawak across Canada.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And to that end, like I have students in Vancouver, I have students in Calgary, I have students in Ottawa and other towns outside of Toronto. So it's a question of whether or not someone gets bitten by the bug hard enough that they go all the way into 6 and then towards 7 and continue to grow and develop and build. Yeah, because there's a lot of work that goes into building a school or building a community or building a group. Yep. Right. Talk to any of the FQIs. Like how long did it take you to get a level 6 a student that wanted to stay all the way up to level 6 with you? How many people did you go through before that one person stuck with you? Oh, especially if you're a multidisciplinary school. Because I look at Belton, for example. Guro Coach Belton. He's a multidisciplinary combat sports academy. Balintawak and PTK and NSI are a big influence and part of said academy, but the majority of his student and athlete base are Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu. And so in my times down with them, I ran the same model that like my pure FMA students, I had like 2.
Now, as for all my athletes, they did FMA. They just did. They just didn't realize unless I stated that this is an FMA thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I snuck it into everything. But as to like truly, this is FMA as like you are my FMA student. Yeah, I had like one or two. But it is the nature of a multidisciplinary academy of, yeah, you're going to get influenced by other stuff, but the priority is the priority that you're there as a combat sports athlete, or is the priority there as an FMA practitioner and student? And if the school is singular, which if a school is sustainable as a singular entity, whether it's Shotokan Karate, Judo, Balintawak, I mean that's incredible because of one, the community that's created, the business structure, and the other one is the market that sustains it.
Yeah, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. One,
yeah,
and the second thing is I came at it as a personal trainer. I didn't come at it as a group coach.
Yep.
So my whole structure is based around having semi-private classes. So at most I'll have 2 to 3 people in my class, with the exception of one class a week. I have a group class on Saturday mornings, and that's it. The rest of the time is just semi-private.
That's cool. I like that approach.
I can then price it accordingly. So it's a little bit more expensive than going to a group martial arts academy, but it's also way less expensive than paying for private classes to learn a martial art. Consequently, I can spend a lot of time with people working on things specific to them and not this general be all to everybody.
Yeah.
If you have 10 people in the room, you can't focus on all their needs. You just can't.
That is correct. Classroom management, whether it's a gym, a dojo, or a group of 6-year-olds, it's still an issue at scale. Yeah. And so the opportunity to actually spend time with an athlete or a student, for one, you get to build that connection with them and they with you, and also the development of their skills. Yeah. Being able to tie them together at like a group session at the end of the week, so everybody can like integrate and not. Yeah, that's genius. That is an awesome process. So what's also great about like what this podcast does, it helps explain like successful processes from instructors and coaches and trainers. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's great.
Positively. Now, what I don't want people to think though is that I think that group classes are duds. They're not. Yeah. They're great. Majority of my martial arts experience or my history has been through group classes. And what they're good for is building community. Like group classes are brilliant for that. And teaching a group is its own skill set. This is what I'm learning because I've just started group classes I've done 3 of them now. And each time I'm learning new things and what I can or cannot do inside a group and the progressions that I can do with individuals I can't do with a group because it's the level of instruction that I may or may not need. So it's its own skill set. So these guys that can teach and create good students out of these groups, like kudos to them.
Drive-by corrections is a big part of that.
It really is. Yeah, it's a skill.
Room management. Oh yeah.
It's not my skill. So that's why I went towards my strength, right? Which is the smaller groups and the one-on-one type stuff.
Well, that's awesome because that's the other one too, is when people look at the business of martial arts as a primary source of income, they sacrifice certain things, and then they also try to fit themselves into specific roles that they are not skillful of. Like in my case, as a full-time martial arts instructor owning a school, I was an okay instructor across the board. I was a terrible businessman. Just period. So I was forcing myself into a role that I could not fulfill because I didn't have the experience, education, ability, or just want to do so. So just in the same, when people are trying to create time, space, and opportunity to generate income, they end up sacrificing either their ethos, their integrity, their professionalism, and just people who suffer at all of that. So being able to play at your strength and apply it that best fits for you and your students, that's a beautiful bit of synergy.
Yeah, and I wish I could say it was an overnight success, but it has been like 10 plus years in the making. Yeah. This is not like it just sort of blossomed out of nothing. Yeah. And it was 10 years of personal training and gaining clients and learning how to run a business as a personal trainer. Yeah. And with the support of the gyms that I worked in. And I think that people need to take into account if they're going to be opening their own business.
Absolutely.
Because business is another skill set.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. You got to learn how to market. You got to learn how to do sales. You got to learn how to manage your money. You got to learn your accounting. You got to learn bookkeeping, all that stuff. If you're going to be a one-man shop, and if you're not going to be a one-man shop, then you have to learn how to outsource. You got to learn who you can trust, who you can't trust, like all these things which they don't teach you in school. So it really is the school of hard knocks when you're opening up your own business, and it's fall on your face, pick yourself up, figure it out, fall on your face again, pick yourself up, figure it out, and that's the process.
Yep. And that is honestly, that's the best as painful as it is, it's the best process. Because one, you build a personal connection to the tangible gains, and you utilize failure, one, as a learning experience, but two, as a point and purpose behind, I won't do that again, and I will do this better. So it creates a circumstance of growth, provided they have the opportunity for growth. Which, rolling back to another thing, coming from a personal trainer standpoint and a semi-private instructor, there's this thing about when you spend time to develop a student and you get to really know them. And this is a big issue that I run into trying to problem solve my own process behind this. But I ask often, there's this thing about the weight and responsibility of knowledge. And so with that, because working with people, especially privately, you get to know people. You get to know their wants, their wishes, their fears, their anxieties. You get to know all this truth, and that can be, you can be vicariously traumatized by it, and you can get burnt out by it, and it's called compassion fatigue. So my query, as I often ask all my guests, is, for one, what is your process to deal with vicarious traumatization if you've had to deal with it? And two, how do you deal with compassion fatigue if you've had to deal with it? And third, what are your suggestions to deal with those so you don't get burnt out ultimately?
That is a fantastic question. What I have found with my students, and specifically with one of them, through no fault of his own, everyone has their life experience. Everything brings what they bring to the table, and he triggers me left, right, and center, not because he's done, like he's just being him, but because it just brings up all my old stuff. Yeah. Right. And so there will be times where I'm getting short-tempered, and he's not doing anything to really deserve that, other than he just told me this. And now I have a short temper, and it's just really it triggers my things, right? So when I first got into this gig and was training people in my basement and was getting to know this guy, it was triggering me left, right, and center, and at the time I didn't recognize it, and then obviously you talk to people about it, and it's like, well, is it him or is it you? And then figures out, oh no, it's me. So more often than not, when I get triggered and I start to get testy, I realize that my when I'm being triggered, it's not them, it's me. And just by that realization alone, I find that it's okay. I can just let this go. Like it's just me. Right? And it's not fair to anybody else to put my shit on them. It's just not.
Projection. It's that issue of projection, ownership, and letting things go.
100%. Yeah. So it took me a while to figure that out, and it took me a while to get my head around that, to the point where now, like it for me, it's just shits and giggles with this guy now. Like it's a lot of fun. And he's doing really well. In my opinion, anyway. I don't know what he thinks about it, but yeah, in my opinion, he's doing really well given what he's got going on. And as far as compassion fatigue, I would say that I'll refer back to my personal training days, because with one-on-one versus 2 or 3-on-1, it's way more intimate in terms of the level of connection that you get with your client. And so I would have a lot of depressed and anxious people come in, and that in that milieu is where I would learn how to deal with that. And more often than not, it would be a bunch of trainers sitting in the back room talking it out, believe it or not.
Yep.
And you know, like, oh, this client said this, and man, they're going through this right now. It's like, oh yeah, well, my client said this, and she's going through that right now. And, oh, my guy, he just did this. It's like, wow. And then you'd have some things that happen on the floor, and like for one, we had one guy had an aortic embolism right on the floor, which is like life stopping, and apparently there's like a 5 to 15% survival rate of this if you don't get the ambulance to the person or get the person to the hospital within like 15 minutes. So we were close to a hospital. The ambulance just happened to be in the neighborhood. They were up within 5 minutes and had him out the door and at the hospital within 15, and he survived.
That's incredible.
Which is like, and we're all just like, dodge that bullet. But that was an interesting office talk. So I guess what I'm saying is that you need your people that you can talk to decompress with. Yep. And that's what I have. Like I don't know whether you're able to do this with your wife or not, but I decompress a lot with Cindy, and, and a lot of this wouldn't be possible without her. Yep. Right. And the support that I get from her.
It's taken me a long time to figure that out, because one part of my issue prior is this issue about manipulation, isolation, etc. Is one, I didn't trust my wife. I've been married to my wife for 17, almost 18 years now. But during the time of when I was the persona of Coach Kurt, owner, all these things, I did not trust my wife with my vulnerability of the gym and all those things. So it took the death of me, killing myself, and then the 4 years subsequently afterwards of therapy, both on myself, working with my wife, to build that connection, that trust, and have that absolute 100% dialogue of, we're just going to lay everything out. We'll go through that process of communication and dealing with the balance of, are we in the window? Are we out of the window of tolerance? How are we going to communicate? Is it a good time to communicate? Building that connection, that trust, and the vulnerability, and the process of processing through that. Now, for a business owner in a professional setting, that's really hard, especially when you're dealing with your coworkers and a administrative leadership structure. Building that trust and vulnerability without reciprocity, because you're talking about your money here. That's a scary situation. So a lot of people will either, one, they'll isolate, two, they'll just push it off as not their problem, and so they suffer, everybody else suffers. Or the last one, which is the hardest one, is they take on everything, and then they try to be everything to everyone, and they lack the skills, the capability, the knowledge, and the authority to do that. And so ultimately everybody suffers. And this is where that fatigue comes in, where you just get burnt out, because as a martial artist, you're not a therapist unless you're a therapist. As a martial artist, you're not a priest unless you're a priest. So, and the fact is, your job is to teach them martial arts, not to provide them therapy. So that's, unless it is, and that's a hard part for a lot of martial arts instructors. Some of them have, with temporarily holding that data, that information, that weight of knowledge, you doing something with that and then releasing it and not taking that responsibility on them, because one, learning it's not their authority is hard. And
sometimes what we read as compassion isn't necessarily compassion,
right?
Meaning that when you hear of compassion, it's generally trying to smooth the road for the person. Oh, I feel that for them, and you step in there and you try to help. And you try to support. What I'm finding is that there are times where that's true, and there are times where you have to let them fail.
Yes.
And it's more compassionate to let them fall on their face so they can figure it out than it is to mow the lawn for them and then clear the way. And you just can't. Again, you cannot be all things to all people.
Nope.
And I think you stated that quite well. And like I say to my students, is that as much as I don't like it, there's life outside of Balintawak. But while you're here, life is Balintawak. And so what I try to foster is an environment where problems get left at the door as much as possible. so that a lot of that doesn't get dumped on me. Not that anybody would, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's, I do that reflexively now, coming out of the personal training element of it, because I realized that I got far too invested in my clients' lives, and now I'm here. I'm invested in my students' lives. I'm invested in their training. Honestly, I put their training ahead of mine. It's far more important to me that they do well than me putting in my reps. Like I'll give up my training session to make sure my students get one.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I'm giving the support to my students. That's where I'm hoping that they feel the positivity of it anyway. And I'm hoping, not because I don't want to hear their problems, because they're all good people and I want to be there for them if I need to be. But let's time and a place.
Yep.
And
got to be present and got to be mindful.
Yeah.
And contextualized based upon those.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. And especially if we have a semi-private class and there's other people coming into the classroom, it can't be all about you. It can't be all about this guy. It can't be all about that guy. Right now, we're here to, maybe just by going through this and just shutting your brain off from that for an hour, you'll actually feel a lot better. And I found that with some of my students, where they come in and you can tell they come in and they have a crappy mood, but by the time they're done, they're doing much better. So, you know what, I came in here with a crappy mood, but doing this today and I got this done and I'm finally getting this and I'm understanding that. This was awesome. Let's do this again. It's like, well, good, you're my student, so why not?
One could say movement is medicine. So yeah. Now that is a great process. And thank you for sharing that, because again, what I find valuable about this podcast is, it's FMA. We talk about FMA, we talk about Filipino culture, but reality is it's really about the people who have taken upon themselves to use FMA as a sense of as a place of joy. Because I find that the reason why we fight is based upon love. So the reason why we do FMA, as we have lasted for some of us for 20, 30 some odd years, GM Bobby up until antiquity, is because he loves it. And just the same for the students that come into it because they love it. Like the podcast I did the other day, people got into HEMA and stick fighting and sword fighting because they like swords and like hitting people with it. So it's a place of joy. It should be. And
it's supposed to be a lot of fun. Yeah. But if you're going to do it, let's do it well, guys.
Yeah.
Let's hop in, like both feet. Like, and if we're training, let's train.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that mentality, the be here now mentality of like, one, just don't waste your time. So.
And there are days where we get into a class and all people want to do is talk. And I'm one of those guys. Yeah. I won't lie to you. But what I'll do is I'll try to interact it with what it is that we're doing. Yeah. Right. So we'll talk about history of FMA. We'll talk about where this technique came from. We'll talk about what I think or why I think it's this way. And then I want you guys to work on this. And these are the reasons why. And this is where it's going. Questions. And then they'll start asking questions. And it becomes this round robin of discussion. And then we'll try out 2 or 3 moves here. And then we'll stop and we'll analyze and we'll have a chat about it. And so do we get tons of reps in? No. But people gain a greater understanding of what the system is and why it's doing what it's doing. Right. And I don't have all the answers. I don't. I'm still exploring. I don't. Well, GM Bobby is way further down that road and has way more answers than I do. Right. But I think that's part of the process is exploring and experimenting and asking questions and setting up answers as a hypothesis for further exploration. Right. And I'm also of the mind that as much as I'm heading in this direction, if I find out even like a number of years in that I was wrong, I'll turn on a dime and go somewhere else. Yeah. I'm not like my personality and identity is not tied up in my rightness.
That's a hard one too, because this runs into the issue about the ego and cult of personality is often that we see in organizations like this. Now, what is also interesting in that approach of not everything has to be physical, because martial arts is, you have the martial and the art. The art also can be stated that art falls in the category of history, education, culture, all the cognitive processes that is necessary to that informs and gives nuance to the martial. Because if it's just the martial, it can just be effective violence. But the reasons why, the history, the context, the stories that are unique to it, that's the stuff that people can talk about, explore, pontificate long after their body fails them. Because hopefully at the end of all this, provided you don't have CTE and anything else, is that your brain should still be there after your body is kind of gone by the wayside.
Yeah. And it also gives more dimension to what it is that you're doing.
Yep.
It's not single dimensional. I'm just here for martial, like for the movement or the tactical or physical application of martial arts. It's the whole, what's the word?
It's the gestalt. Yeah. It's like a gestalt approach, to use an art term. Yeah.
Yeah.
So which leads into, like, we were talking about this before we went live, about the real nuggets of wisdom is actually at mealtime between or after training. So what are your can we expound upon that?
In my deadheading behind GM Bobby, as I was following him around the globe, probably our favorite times, because Cindy was with me for all of these, or for most of them anyway, would be our meal times, where you sit and you chat with all the other FQIs and all the other people who've been around for a while, with GM Bobby specifically, and listening to his stories and listening to his approach to Balintawak and what he feels that Balintawak is and what it isn't. And being in the community that he's built. And that goes back to that number one again, is like, build your community, man. Because that's really, whether everyone's the best in the room or not. And at 50, I shouldn't be the best in the room. I might be the instructor, but I'm not going to be the best fighter there. I'll continue to get better, but I'm not going to be the best, because I'm going to have some 20-something breathing up my tailpipe. Right. So again, and that goes to that humility piece. But my real goal is to continue to build that community based on the example of following this guy around and having these massive meals with like a community of dozens, and then maybe 5 people at a table sometimes, and maybe 20 people at a table. But the camaraderie and the laughter and the stories, man, the story. There are some things you get told that you just wouldn't expect to come out of somebody else's mouth, but it's
the thumb joke. Yeah. Matter watch GM Bobby karaoke, which is a beautiful thing to watch.
Yes. We have some good video of him doing karaoke here in Toronto. He has a great voice.
I got video from West Coast this year.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's funny. He's so nervous when he gets up in front of a crowd, but then he does so well.
Yeah. It's like, we love you anyway. So
yeah, exactly.
Just have fun.
Yeah.
Now, and again, this speaks to, again, leadership, because instruction of a group is leadership, and the culture that you create from a military standpoint, we call this command culture, or command climate culture, but it's across the board. It's any organization, the positive culture that is instilled based upon the leadership there and 100%. What climate they're willing to put up with. And so, to the credit of GM Bobby and subsequently all of his subordinates, the FQIs, they have engendered and fostered the same type of culture, and that's beautiful. And we need more of that.
Yes, we do. And like the big communities that I'm aware of, and every FQI has their community and their tight-knittedness. The communities that I've gotten to witness that are really cool is like the Cincinnati crew. They're the first Balintawak crew in North America, right? Because that's where GM Bobby settled first, and GM Finnetel was the first FQI, as I understand it anyway. And so that was like a number of years ago. So that community has really grown and developed, and especially under PG Melaniel. But you go and you interact with these guys, and they're, again, very welcoming, very open, great group of guys. And then for the first time got to experience the West Coast crew
Oh yeah,
Holy
that
crow!
what
Yeah,
about
these guys
familia?
are like that. It's one thing for them to come down to World Camp and you see them from a distance, you wave at them a little bit, but then you actually get to interact with them and experience that community. And that was a phenomenal trip. We had a great time and got to meet some really cool people. And again, I would suggest that for those of us that are doing FMA, the thing which is going to keep us here isn't necessarily the martial art per se, although that's our reason for being here. The thing that's going to keep us here is going to be the people and the community and the connections and networks that we build through that. I know now that I can hop all over the states, and I'm likely to find a Balintawak community somewhere along there that's gonna at least let me train with them. If not, let's go have a dinner or something.
Yep.
Right. Which is pretty awesome. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the cool part. Going back to it is social media, interconnectivity, positive culture. We can plug and play wherever, so long as we maintain the same ethos and positivity, support. That is how we build a positive culture. Because a big part of this podcast, also that I try to explore, is how do we make FMA more than just FMA, and how do we build a positive culture that continues to invite people instead of create this mystical, antagonistic, political not fighting nonsense that is often played out on the internet in the comment section. Is how do we create that community that we want to be part of? And
I think you hit on it earlier. It comes down to leadership. And developing leaders who operate that way. Leadership in and of itself is a soft skill.
Yep.
Right. And it's something that has to be learned and practiced, just like any other skill. And Lord knows I make my mistakes, and Lord knows like that it's an ongoing process. But to your question, not everyone's on the same page. Not everyone thinks that's the goal. So really, it comes about trying to find like-minded people and then banding those people together.
Yep.
And then there'll be other people who have a different view of what community is, and then they're going to build their own community over there. And I'm sure that there'll be some stones thrown back and forth, because that just ends up what's happening as soon as you have people involved in communities and tribes and whatever you want to do with that. But so really, it's just about trying to foster your own corner of the universe as much as you can, and hope that the people who step through your door are the people that you want there.
Yep. Because like the scope of effect, it's like throwing rocks in a pond. The scope and effect is within the limit of that initial pebble in the pond. People would think, some people want the big waves going to the extent of the pond, but reality, our scope of effect is that one pebble being tossed in there. You throw enough and then it could reach the entirety of the pond, but the fact is we can only influence that of which we can reasonably within that. So it's not about global reach. That's too big. What it can be is our 1 and 2s in the backyard leading into our 10 to 12 in a gym, leading into the bigger community outwards. And I think when people have that, keep that perspective, this is where we keep things humble. 2, we also can build more bridges that way, seeing that we're trying to do the same thing and loving the same thing. Therefore, that's why we're here, and that's why we continue to do it. And I wish more people would see that. And I know people do. It's just there's this issue of the vitriol in the comment section versus what you see in person.
It's also a patience piece, right? Because everyone wants to build their community and they want it here yesterday.
Yep.
GM Bobby took, let's see, he moved out of the Philippines in the late 70s to now to build the community that he has.
Basically 50 years. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a patience piece.
Yeah.
And I think that is one, clarity of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Two, knowing exactly what our strengths and weaknesses are as best we can.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We continue to strengthen our strengths, and then we ally with people who can fill up our weaknesses within the community.
Yep.
Because if you spend all your time trying to shore up the holes of your weaknesses, man, you're not going to get anywhere. But especially when there's somebody else who can actually just step in and fill that role.
Yeah,
right? That's what community's for.
Surrendering that ego and building that trust. And again, like with leadership, you can, as things that I have learned with the military and then with organizations, is that you can have a tyrant, you can have a benevolent tyrant, you can have a friend, you can have a supervisor, you can have a manager, you can have a mentor.
Yeah,
mentor is subline as a coach. Often enough, at the very base level, people start off as a tyrant leading into a benevolent tyrant, and they'll stay with like that friend area because it's safer, because they don't want to take on that responsibility. But the fact is, if you're going to be in charge of something, you're responsible for that thing and the effect therein. And
not necessarily just inside the realm of your job.
Yeah.
And that's the part that a lot of people don't seem to get. Even within, like, from a leadership point of view, management's one thing. Leadership's another. Like you're dealing with the human being, not just with the martial artist in your class. And this is, like I said, the community that GM Bobby has created is a beautiful community, and I'm very grateful to be part of it. And by extension, I'm grateful for the friends that I have made, the brothers and sisters in Balintawak that I have made. So, and again, as part of what this podcast also does is to show my gratitude, because it's going to take me a while to get my FQI. Just is, but to show my gratitude, I'm more than happy to have the conversations, tell the stories, and celebrate my brothers sisters in Balintawak, as in the same with the rest of the FMA community. And then there are also some other great communities, like as much as we're tooting the Balintawak horn, I know that there's some great modern Arnis communities out there as well, that I've interacted with, and they interact with us, like with the Balintawak community as well, and it all comes together quite well. And GM Bobby's very friendly with the modern Arnis. Well, he's friendly with everybody, but he is. Yeah, like you're more likely than not to see modern Arnis people showing up at Balintawak seminars.
Point in case with Datu Tim Hartman. So
and he's been super supportive of GM Bobby. Right.
And just in the same, you got Datu Kelly Warden, because that's the other intersection in that region, because that's another community I belong to by way of Belton. So, like, when you find the like-minded people, there's growth. So, absolutely.
And I think that to your point of one growing community, one of the ways you can grow your community is branching out to other styles. And if you find like-minded people in other styles, then you're good. And if you find at least a common language between the arts, at the very least, you have friends.
And this is where I find that hosting events is a big part of building that fellowship and that opportunity to network. So part of my challenge from my last podcast is, if anybody's got, for one, like a sparring event, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a sparring event, but if you have an FMA event, I would love to build a list that I can publish through this podcast. So is there a particular event that you have coming up that you would like to put out so I can add it to my list?
Sure. Pen and paper ready?
Yep.
Or you could actually go back to the recording. I don't know. So GM Bobby's coming to Toronto the weekend of June 1st. Really looking forward to that. He was here last year as well, and we were fortunate enough to host him for that. And we'll be training out of the Monkey Vault, which won't mean anything to you other than it's central Toronto. So very easy for people to get to. Friday evening will be senior student training. So who's like level 5, level 6, level 7. And then from 8 till 4 on Saturday, we'll be doing GM Bobby event, and then there'll be some FQIs who are going to be presenting as well. So myself, Guru Terrence Dowd, Guru Joe Apostol, and I'm pretty sure if we can find track draft round, then we'll get Guru Draft Demura doing 15 minutes as well. So it won't just be he and Bobby presenting this time. There'll be FQIs who are starting to pick up the torch and show their flavor of Balintawak as well.
Cool. Does he have a flyer? I'm looking at his website. Does he have a flyer yet for this? Because I'm still trying to find West Coast flyers.
I have a flyer that's made up. I need to send it out to him. I'm still getting my website all set up for this.
Got it. Well, when you do, send it to me. I can throw it up on the page as well. So
perfect. Appreciate it.
The thing that I have the challenge for any of my guests and people who connect with me is like, I will put a list together. So one, we can connect and build that community there, because I know other people are doing it as well, but I also like to do my part in it. So more that we have these, have the awareness of these events, more that we can fellowship, and more that we can create the future of FMA that we want and desire for the next generation.
Yeah,
for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it only grows from there.
Yeah.
Love it.
Sweet. Well, we've been at this for a couple of hours. Do you have anything you want to close with? I really appreciate your time.
That was a good close right there. No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing with this podcast.
Awesome.
Thank you for letting me come on and chat with you for the last couple hours.
Yeah,
man, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has. This is, again, the gift of your time and your wisdom is something that I cherish, and I'm grateful to share it with the community. If it wasn't there to share from, I would still do it anyways, because I like hanging out with cool people.
I don't know that I call it wisdom, but it's my experience anyway.
Yeah, there's some gems in there. There absolutely is.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you.
Sweet.
Anything else before we hop off?
Not that I could think of. I don't have any questions in the comment section of either Facebook or Instagram. But we've had a good solid people just kind of hanging out.
She wants to know if she can say hello.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come on, Sis.
Hi, Cindy. How are you?
Yeah.
It's good seeing you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Are you going to make it down to West Coast? By the way, are both of you going to make it down to West Coast?
At some point, potentially. Okay. We're saving up our shot. This year we're not going to be traveling much because again, just opened up the new location for the school.
Yeah.
But we're also starting to save our shekels for World Camp 2025 in the Philippines.
Nice, awesome.
So yeah, well, I don't know. I have family in Vancouver, so I should probably get out there at some stage. And if I can coincide that with an event, then I will do so. But
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, maybe by 2026, we'll see.
Okay, well, whatever works. In the meantime, we have the internet.
I can't believe that I'm planning like 3 years or 4 years in advance, but here we are.
I mean, that's good.
Yeah, I suppose.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you. I'm going to drop you down. We'll do our outro, and just hang out in the lobby for a sec. Awesome.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kurt.
Well, thank you. All right. So that was a couple hours. I had a great time with this podcast, as I do with all my podcasts. But again, each one of these was really special for me, and I enjoy doing them and sharing them with you. So following up, if you have an event, send it to me, and I can add it to my list. And like I said, I would love to have a comprehensive list of things that goes on within the FMA community. So how we build a community is we have to have things to go do and people to talk with. So if I can facilitate that, I'm more than happy to. But in the meantime, I'm grateful for everybody hanging out here. Thank you for being here. And I'm not going to do a long outro because I just don't. So anyways, everybody have a wonderful day, and I'll see you later. And